And in the prior module, we took a look at how to do for loops.
That's right, yeah. So we were starting to look at how you can write code that will repeat efficiently.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the for loop is fantastic, and I have to admit, and we talked a lot about this yesterday, that there's oftentimes multiple ways to solve the exact same problem. And when it comes to having to do something X number of times, I trend towards, and this is true across all programming languages, some form of a for or a for each, depending on the language, some form of a for or a for each. But the catch with using for or for each, depending on your language of choice, is that you have to have a pretty set number of items right from the get-go. And a lot of times, you don't actually know that. So you might be looking to go through a loop of records where something could change while you're looping through it, or maybe while your code is executing, maybe you're going through a queue. And something might happen where I go, all right, well, I know this item is going to take me a little bit longer to process, so I'm just going to throw that back down to the bottom, or something like that. So it could be that I don't know right up front the number of times that I need to do something, or the number of times that I'm about to do something could change while my code executes.
Yeah,
so,
or just from one execution to the next.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, so, we still need to have kind of those same actions, the kind of real world or analogy of, pour a cup of coffee for each guest. By the way, pour my cup of coffee first, please.
Okay.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes. Thank you. Washing all of the dishes, putting together each name card. You have to handle all of those different things, kind of those analogies. But when we get into programming, I might be looping through a file. I might be looping through a number of entries in memory.
I'd say a lot of times in coding, we'll have things like somebody gives us a file and we want to read all the values in a file, or we do have a database table and we want to read all the people from a particular country from a database, but we don't know how many records we're going to be getting back from a database before we start.
Exactly.
So, yeah, there's a lot of situations where we know we're going to have to do something over and over, but we just don't know how many times.
Exactly. And sometimes, we can calculate it, but again, not always, So if it's a scenario like this, where, we know that we've got 20 guests, then we could just go in and explicitly state, okay, fine, it's 20 guests. Or it could be a scenario where maybe we've got this in a list, and a couple of people asked about that earlier. We'll be talking about lists.
We will get into lists. Yeah.
But I could go in and I could ask the list, well, how many items are inside of you? And I could throw that into there. Or we could actually just simply say for in list. But now I'm sort of stealing your thunder.
Yeah. Come on, I'm going to get to that. Don't steal my next slide.
Right, you're right. Okay, I'm sorry. But in any event, I can calculate that number of times, but that's not always going to be the case. And this is where while loops come into play. That the concept of a while loop is we're going to do something, perform an operation, while something is true. So what I'm going to do here is sort of just jump straight to the syntax. And this is a perfect example of where a while loop is going to shine. So let's start with, of course, keyword while.
Yep.
And just as a real quick refresher, I'm just going to do this right away. You'll notice my colon, and then you'll also notice the tab in right there. So kind of, again, that same thing with an if statement or a for loop or everything. We've got the colon, we've got the tab. This is what's going to be executing, and that's just simply what says, hey, go there. All right, cool. So again, we've seen all of that. Now let's explain the concept of a while loop, and I think the easiest way to explain it is to do it in English. A while loop means do something while a condition is true, while something is true. So if we go back to our code here, what we're going to be saying is while answer, whatever answer is, we'll talk about what answer is here in just a moment, while it's not for. So this could be something like while file is not empty, while all candidates are not processed, or again, some conditions. So as long as something is true, we're going to stay inside of that loop and we're going to kind of keep doing what we're doing. Now, the next part that I want you to notice here is that unlike that range, where again we had that set of defined numbers, what you're going to notice with this example is we're asking the user for input. And we're asking the user to input the answer to a question. So what is 2 plus 2? I have no idea how many times it's going to take somebody to enter in the correct value. It could be that they do it the first time. It could be that they do it the 51st time. And again, the next time that the program runs, I still don't know. And the next time, I still don't know.
Right.
So there's no way that I could say, well, we're just going to loop 5 times, or we're going to loop 20 times. I don't know how long it's going to take them to get it right. So this is where a while loop shines, because now I can say, well, look, as long as they keep getting this answer wrong, we're going to stay here until they get it right.
Yes.
That's what my while loop is all about. All right.
I'm
So
going to
let's
keep going as long as I have to.
Exactly.
While loops are great that way.
Yeah, and that's really it. So give me 1 second here. I'm going to do 2 things behind the scenes. One is going to be to get out of my slide, and the other one is to launch zoomit, which, by the way, if you haven't already seen or heard, what we're using to draw on our screens and zoom in is a great little tool called zoomit. I know that we've got a lot of students. What was the percentage? Did you see the poll?
30% of the people here are students.
Yeah.
Yep.
So one of the things that I remember in college and in university was having to do different presentations to kind of show off, hey, this is what I learned. This is a great little tool to play with to do presentations. And again, it's a free tool. It's a great way to draw attention to the spots on the screen that you want. Okay. In any event, let's start doing this here. And I'm just going to go in and say answer equals 0. Now, a couple of things that are worth highlighting. Number one is you're going to notice that I'm going to initialize that variable right away. And the reason for that is because I'm going to use this on my while loop. So if I'm going to use this somewhere, it needs to be initialized in advance. So I'm initializing that up at the top. The second thing that I want you to notice here is that I've initialized it to a string, and I'm going to be using strings. Now, you might be looking at that and you might be thinking, well, gosh, Christopher, that seems a little bit odd because you're asking somebody a math question. Mm-hmm. That you're asking them, answer equals input, and what is 2 plus 2? And you are right that I am asking them a math question. But if you remember back to yesterday, input gives me back a string. So the fact that I'm asking them a math question is sort of irrelevant. It's sort of secondary here. That the fact that it's a math question is not what's key. What's key here is the fact that we're doing an input, which again is going to give us back a string, and that's what we want to do here.
Okay.
Okay. So now,
rather than converting everything to numbers and comparing, I mean, you could have converted the answer into a number and said if the answer is not equal to a number 4, but in this case, it's a bit of overkill.
Exactly. So here, you know what we could also do? We could just do this real quick. What is the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything? Mm-hmm. Boy, how about that? I barely had enough space to fit that onto the screen.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you. All right, so now let's go in and run this. It will then ask me what's the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. And as we all know, that's, of course, 42. Yeah. And I'll hit enter, and it says, congratulations, you are right. Let me kind of run that on the bad side. So we'll say 16, which is the number of the day. Hit enter, nope. 54, nope. 67, nope. 42. And now it says, congratulations,
there you go.
You're right.
And so now we exit this loop.
Exactly. Yeah, so it was waiting for the answer to be 42. So as long as it wasn't, it was just going to stay inside of that loop. And that's a perfect example of where to use that type of a loop, because I had no idea up front how many times it was going to take for whoever it was to get that answer correct. Okay. Let's see. I want that. That's sort of weird.
Going back to your slides?
I am, but PowerPoint is beating me up here. There we go. Okay.
All right, you're good.
I'm having PowerPoint issues. All right. So let's talk this through. What will this code do. And I'm talking a bit slowly here to kind of wait for the bit of a lag that we've got here for our fine viewers to go in and kind of contribute inside the chat window.
Right. So I can see you're using Turtle again.
Yeah. Okay. So we're using Turtle again.
You've got a counter, a variable called counter.
A variable called counter.
And you're setting that to start off at 0. So I know counter is 0 when the program starts.
Yep. Okay.
Then you have a while loop. That says while counter is less than 4. And I know right now when I'm starting the program, counter is only equal to 0. So 0 is definitely less than 4, so I'm going to enter the loop.
Okay, that's good math. Yep.
Okay, and then, so I'm going to enter the loop, and it's going to move my little line forward 100 and turn right. So this is me trying to like draw lines on the screen again. So I move forward 100 and I turn a corner.
Yep.
And then I'm saying counter equals counter plus 1. Now that's my way of saying add 1 to the counter.
Yep.
So now counter is equal to 1. So now, I guess when I get to the end of a loop, it's going to go back to that while statement again. And 1 is still less than 4.
Yep.
So I'll go through, draw another line, add another counter, it'll be 2. I'll go up, 2 is still less than 4. I'll draw another line, I'll turn right, I'll add a number to, it'll be, counter will now be 3. I'll go back up, 3 is less than 4, it'll draw a last line. And then the next time I go through, counter will be equal to 4. And when 4 is not less than 4, and then it should exit the loop. So 4 times?
Okay, so it's going to do the loop 4 times. What's it going to wind up drawing out?
Square.
It's going to wind up drawing out a square. So it's going to go forward 100. It's going to turn right 90, forward 100, right 90, forward 100, right 90, forward 100. It was actually a little off of a square on my drawing. Not bad by hand, though. But in any event, it's going to draw out that square. So we've actually already seen this. We just saw this with a for loop rather than with a while loop. Now, I do want to just pivot off of this real quickly here, just to highlight that little counter equals counter plus 1. That there was a couple of people in the chat window that had mentioned the concept of variables in Python and kind of mentioned, oh, you don't have to declare them. And the answer to that is no, you can just start using them. So I also want to highlight the fact that what we've done is a counter, again, is a bucket. So what you can do is dump that bucket out and put in a new value, but you could use that variable for that update. And I gave the analogy yesterday that, again, if it's a box, if I had 2 slices of bread, that I could take out those 2 slices of bread, put in a couple of slices of ham, some nice good spicy mustard, and then put that back into the box. And what I've now done is I've used what was in there, but I've now updated it. So we've gone from 2 slices of bread to a sandwich. So sort of that same concept here, that our counter, kind of coming back over to the slide, is our 2 slices of bread. Our number 1 is our ham and good spicy mustard. So I've combined those together to now update the value that's inside of there. Okay, so that's going to draw us out a square exactly as we would expect it. So to spin this back to what we did before, these 2 blocks of code are really the same. So let's answer the question. Which should you use? Well, the answer is, it really just depends on a matter of personal preference.
Yeah, in this case, I like the for loop easier because it's easier for me to keep track of how many times loop is executing.
Exactly.
When I just say for range is 4. But I just, for me, when I'm running a for loop, if I know I want to execute 4 times, I like just saying the range is 4. I know it executes 4 times. I don't have to think about it. With a while loop, I have to sit there going, counter was 0 the first time, then 1, then 2, so it's less than 3. So that, I got it right, it's 4 times. So in this situation, I prefer the for loop, but it is a personal preference.
It is a personal preference, and I'm with you. And the reason that I'm with you, and I'm going to steal a little bit of my thunder here, there's a slide coming up. I'm allowed to steal my own thunder. But coming up, we do have a slide on this, but I'm going to highlight it for right now. The most important line here is this right here. I have to make sure that I update the counter. So this is on me. So if you're not sure of, which should I use, for loops or while loops, again, it does come down to a matter of personal preference. For me, the dividing line is, can I have something else automatically handle the condition for me? So in the case of our for loop, the condition is, as long as we haven't reached 4 times yet, keep doing this.
Okay.
That's the condition. And this little in range will automatically do that for us. But over here, it's my responsibility to go in and update the counter. Again, kind of that lazy developer. If I can let something else do it, I'm going to let something else do it. So this is really nice in scenarios where that condition there will automatically update. So if I can say, as long as we haven't reached the end of the file, keep doing this.
Yep,
you know, those types of things are perfect for our while loops. Okay, so they both have the same end result. But again, it's going to do kind of whatever it is that, that you might want. Now, I hinted at this, so now we're going to get in and talk a bit about it. That when it comes to a while loop, remember that you're responsible for handling the condition. Susan actually called that out perfectly. Your responsibility. Because now you have to stop and think, okay, well, how many times am I going to loop? So you might do something like this. That you might think, okay, well, counting starts with 0 in most languages. And somebody mentioned this, and it's worth mentioning now. That's not true across all languages. There are certain languages, like VBA, that, you know, doesn't always start with 0. But most languages start counting with 0. Python does, so to avoid any confusion, from here on forward, counting starts with 0. So you might be thinking, oh, okay, right. So counting starts with 0. I'm going to be consistent, so I'm going to declare a counter, and I'm going to set that equal to 0. Cool. Well, I know that I want to draw 4 times, so I'm going to go in and set a while loop, and I'm going to say something like this. I'm going to say counter less than equal 4. So if we talk this through, and it's basically the same code that we saw a second ago, if we talk this through, what's going to wind up happening is it's going to run our conditions, and it's going to go 1. Or I'm sorry, 0 rather. That's going to be the first one. So 0, and then it's going to go 1, it's going to go 2, it's going to go 3. Now 3 is less than equal to 4. It's going to go 4, and then it's going to execute that 4th time because 4 is equal to 4.
Okay, yep.
Generally speaking, 4 is equal to 4, you know? So it's going to execute a collective 5 times.
Right, just because I said less than or equal to instead of less than, I end up, you know, somebody might look at that and think, oh, it'll execute 4 times, and oh, surprise!
Exactly.
5 times.
All because of that little sideways
And that's why I like for loops, when I know exactly how many times I want to execute, because that's the kind of stuff I do by accident, and then I'm executing going, huh, what'd I do wrong?
Yep. Yeah, and this is, you know, one of the things that we talked about yesterday, and both of us have this little hitch in our deliveries, is we both have a propensity to invert our Boolean logic, or make a small little mistake on Boolean logic, like throwing in a less than equals when we just simply meant less than. So, I also have a propensity to say the word propensity, but that's sort of a different conversation. All right, let's kind of bring it back and take another look at another possible scenario that maybe you've decided, you know what, I don't want to count with 0. Or maybe you coded that last one and you said, well, starting with 0 just gave me a mistake, so I'm going to start with the number 1. So you write code that looks like this, that you say, all right, well, counter equals 1. And you say, while counter less than equal to 4. Well, again, let's talk this through. 1, 2, 3. 3 is less than 4. So when this is incremented up to 4, what's going to wind up happening is that that's now going to test as false, meaning that 4 is now going to not be run, so it's only going to run a collective 3 times.
So now it's actually running 1 less than I expected instead of 1 more than I expected, because this time, just because I initialized to 1 instead of initializing to 0 with my variable. Again, these subtle things, right?
Yep,
a less than and equal instead of a less than, initializing your counter to 0 instead of 1, and suddenly you're not execute. These are such common mistakes with while loops. They happen all the time.
They really do. They really do. And if you are going to use this with numbers, the best bit of advice that I could give to you is be consistent. Organization and consistency will set you free. And nowhere is that truer than in code. That if you've going back to that whole lazy developer thing, when it comes to things like formatting my code, I don't think about it. I just do it naturally. The reason that I do it naturally is because I've already made the decisions ahead of time. So I sat down and I said, okay, this is where I'm going to put my tabs. This is where I'm going to, in the case of curly-brace languages, put my curly braces. This is how I'm going to format my variables. I've made all of those decisions in advance. So when I sit down, I don't have to think about those things. I think about my code, and that's it. As a real quick side note, for anybody who's listening who's just getting into developing, I would say that the one book, if I could take any new developer and say, if there's one book that you need to read when you decide you're going to take the next step into development, is a little book called Code Complete, and it's written by Steve McConnell. It's a Microsoft Press book, and it's a fantastic book. It does focus a bit more on languages like C++ and C#, but it does a fantastic job of going over things like, choosing good variable names, dealing with casing, where to put your tabs, and it's all of those little things that, when you're taking a programming course, even like this, we're trying to highlight those things, but we only have so much time. That's all that this book is about. So it spends a lot of time talking about those things that really do have a big impact on the readability of your code. It's a fantastic book. In any event, so I've made all of these decisions in advance. So if I'm going to do a loop like this, I'm always going with 0, and I'm always going with less than. That way, I don't have to think about it. I made this decision already. That's what I'm always going with. So rather than kind of approaching this and going, well, I need to loop 5 number of times. Well, should I go 1 and less than 6, 1 and less than equal to 5? Just stick with what you've always done. And in my case, what I would do is I would set it to 0, and I would go less than, and then the number of times that I would want to increment. So if it's going to be 5, I would say set it to 0, and then go less than 5. And that way it's done. Now, all of these are different looping issues. And we've talked about a couple of different ones here, but,
Before you do that, can I just ask you quickly, the name of that book again? It was called Code Complete, and the author was
Steve McConnell.
McConnell.
I think I have that name right on his name. Code Complete is the name of the book.
All right, I'm putting that down because there was a couple of comments in the chat window just sort of saying, can you just put that name in there? So it's in the chat window there. So if anybody's interested, we put that in there. So the name of the book is in the chat window.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do this. I'm going to actually put the slides to the side here. And I'm going to comment out my my code. And let's do this. I'm going to say import turtle. There we go. And let's say counter equals 0. I'm going to say 4. Whoops, not 4.
You're doing well.
See, my brain just wants to go to for loops.
You knew it was a fixed number of times. You wanted to use a for loop.
Okay, so in any event, you'll notice that I've got my while counter less than 4. And again, you'll notice I'm sticking with that. And I said 0 less than, that's what I always do. That's exactly what I've done here. So I'm going to say turtle dot forward, and we'll say 100. And I'm going to say turtle dot right, and I'm going to say 90, and I'm going to say counter equals counter.
Can I get you to make a little change instead of counter equals counter plus 1? We had a lot of questions in the Q&A about different ways of adding 1 to a variable. Somebody was asking if you can use the plus plus that we sometimes use in some languages, and about the plus equal. So would you do me a favor? No, plus plus won't work, but the plus equal syntax does work. So I just want to show that as an alternative way of adding 1 to a variable or adding a value to a variable, because that came up a few times in the chat window. So we just want to show you that's another way of adding 1 to a variable. That plus equal means take this value and add this to it.
Exactly. Yep. So, and one of the things that I would mention, in particular for my for the junior developers that are watching here, people that are new to development, that a lot of times what I'll find is kind of a little bit of pushback on that bit of syntax, because it's certainly not as clear as doing that. And you know what? I'm sort of with you, but I always kind of look at it like a contraction.
Yeah.
That it doesn't necessarily, especially when you're first getting into it, look as clear, but once you start using it, it just becomes second nature. So you might decide, you know what, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, so I'm not going to use it for right now. That's totally cool. Again, that's just a matter of personal preference, but you are going to see this quite frequently, and honestly, after a little while, you're just going to, oh, I know what that means. And,
yeah, so it's just nice to see both options.
Absolutely.
And it was coming up in the chat window, so I wanted when you got to the demo to show that that is an option. You can either say counter equals counter plus 1 or counter plus equals 1.
Yep.
Your choice.
And in fact, here, let's go ahead and just prove it. So I'm just going to hit start. And then, sure enough,
Yep, it works.
It works.
There you go.
Okay. Now, let me, I'm going to close this out for right now. There we go. And I'm going to go back to my slide. And let's talk about this. How many lines is this loop going to draw?
Okay, how many lines? Oh, I got to go think again. All right, let's see. We've got counter starts off as 0. So I go into the loop, counter is 0. I've got my, keep track of my fingers here. Well, counter is less than 3, so we draw it. And, okay.
So talk it through.
Okay, so I see what you're doing here. Okay, so counter is 0. I enter the loop. I draw a line.
Yep.
I turn right.
Yep.
I go back to the top of the loop, and my counter is still equal to 0,
Okay.
which is still less than 3.
Okay, so keep talking me
I draw
through it.
another line, and I turn right.
Yep.
And then I go to the top of the loop, and counter is still 0. So
Okay.
once again, I enter the loop. This loop is going to go on
Hey, Susan, I'm going to cut you off because it sounds like you're going to go on and on and on forever. Here.
forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever.
Okay, Susan.
Am I done?
Yeah, now you're done. We need a control C.
break.
But yeah, exactly that. And Susan did a perfect job of explaining that with a bit of humor as well. That's exactly what's about to happen. Is my condition here is never going to change because I never updated, I never incremented my counter. And this is one of the biggest pitfalls of using a while loop. Is you have to make sure that that condition is going to change. So let's actually kind of go in and do that. You'll notice it is, in fact, a trick question.
And well done to the Q&A group. We got a lot of people who caught that one. So
awesome.
You got it. Well
Love
done.
It. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to introduce this bug a little more subtly.
Aha! Sneaky. What you've got is because you didn't actually indent the adding 1 to the counter. So
Yep.
just because you forgot to indent it, that code isn't going to execute inside the loop. It'll only execute when you exit the loop. But that means when the loop is executing over and over and over and over again, it never gets out. So it never gets to the line of code that says add 1 to counter.
Exactly. So when I go in and I hit start.
Whee! Round and round she goes. When she stops, nobody knows.
We could be here for a little while.
Maybe now would be a good time to show someone what do you do if you're in Visual Studio. Can we go to Visual Studio and show how you get out of this if you code this by accident, because you will.
You absolutely will. Again, if I had a nickel, I'd be able to take my wife out for a very nice dinner. You'll notice right up there in the upper right-hand corner, there's the Stop Debugging button.
Yep.
Just click that.
And you're back to your
and
code.
You're back to normal. Absolutely.
That's your break
Yep.
command.
Yeah, so we'll go back in, we'll hit start again, and rerun it, and now you'll notice that it's just doing it the 4 times. So close. There we go. Okay.
Yep.
So yeah, and that is going to happen. So if you're going to pick up anything about while loops, the biggest thing that I would say is to make sure that your condition changes. So either you do it manually, or it is easier if whatever it is that you're doing, the scenario is going to update automatically. So I remove an item from a list, or as part of my code, just naturally I'm moving to the next line of the file, or whatever it is that you happen to be doing. So kind of to wrap all that up with our best practices here, use for loops whenever possible. That if you can figure out the number of times that you're going to do it, use that. But again, don't fear the while loop. That there are going to be scenarios where the while loop is the only way, and sometimes, it could actually be a little bit easier to remember. Plus, on top of that, the while loop gives you a little bit more flexibility because there's nothing that says that every single time that you go through the loop that you have to increment the counter. When you're doing a for loop, basically once you start that for loop, the die is cast, so to speak. That's your counter, and away you go. But here, I can go in and get a little bit more manipulation as needed. So, don't fear it. Sometimes it can be a little bit easier. It's certainly going to be easier when you're looping through kind of an unknown number of times. Don't be afraid of the while loop.
Yeah, there is a time and place to use a while loop. So
Exactly.
yes,
Yeah.
you can accidentally end up with an endless loop or execute one too many times, one too few. That's why we test.
Yep.
That's why we have the stop debugging button or Shift F5 if you're a keyboard person.
That's it.
So, I mean, you can get out of it. We'll all make mistakes in our code, but there is a time and a place to use a while loop. And in the end, when it comes to picking loops, a lot of times you can use one or the other.
Yep.
One of these you looked at and said, I get that one. Well, use that one whenever you can. It's simple.
That really is it. I'm sorry, I'm off screen drinking coffee. All right, so your challenge, should you choose to accept it, is create some form of an Etch-a-Sketch program.
I think this one should be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Ask the user for a pen color, ask the user for a line length, ask them for an angle, and then away you go from there. So use that turtle to go ahead and draw the line based on those specifications. Now, a couple of things that are worth highlighting is the fact that, remember, when you're doing the input, it's going to be coming as a string. Also remember that you may need to go in and do the math on that, so that 360 divided by whatever number it is.
Yeah, well, in this case, we're actually letting the user specify the angle.
You're doing it line by line.
This is the user picks the angle when they're doing it.
Yeah, sorry about that. But again, you still have to make sure that you convert that to a number. Congratulations.
Yeah.
You know how to manage loops, and that is a big thing. That's going to be one of the more common things that you're going to be doing inside of your applications, because you're going to have a set of items that, a lot of people have asked kind of what can you do with Python, and the answer is whatever it is that you want. So if you want to create web apps, if you want to create things for automation, etc., you can do that with Python. So one of the target audiences is IT pros. Well, if I'm trying to update X number of servers,
or all the users in a particular group and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly where something like this is going to come into play, and it's exactly where you're going to have a while loop. So I have my list of servers, and I kind of run through and say, update or reboot or whatever it is that you're going to be doing. Awesome.
I'm just going to mention one little thing because it came up in the chat window. There was a question, are we going to cover for else loops and while else loops? We're not going to bother doing demos of syntax. That's a more unusual situation, but just to state fairly simply that it is possible, just like when we saw there was an if statement, you could say if this condition is true, do the following, else do something else. You can do that with loops as well. You can say while this is true, else go do this. So it would basically be on exiting the loop, or when the condition for the loop doesn't occur, it would go to the else statement.
Yeah.
That's a fairly unusual syntax. It's something fairly unique to Python, actually. I haven't seen that in a lot of other programming languages. If you are interested, go hit bang, type in for else Python, while else Python. You'll find lots of great example stuff out there. One of the things about coding, we can't show you every single variation of every single command. We want to show you enough that you understand the concepts and you can start solving problems through the code. But you're going to end up discovering little extra options you can do here and there, different features that we haven't shown you just because we can't show it all.
Exactly.
So just to answer that question, we're not going to cover it explicitly. Go explore. So we'll add that to the challenge.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, with that, what do you say we take a little bit of a break?
Sure.
And we'll come back and we'll answer a big question that a couple of people had earlier, is what about looping through a collection of items? What about a list?
Yes, lists are very powerful. So yes, we're going to get into lists, and we're going to actually start storing values in lists, and then mixing that up with our loop capabilities, and then we can make some real magic.
Oh yeah, then we can have some fun.
Yeah.
So we'll
just gets more fun the further we get into it.
See? Yeah, this is the fun stuff. All right, we'll see you guys back here in 10.